of all, I want to add proudly to my biography that I graduated from Rachel Carson College, before it was called that, of course, but right after Rachel Carson, the next original gangsters, the humans giant humans whose shoulders I've stood on, include centrally Francis Lappé and Wes Gasson, whose hologram is over there. Just everything we have created in terms of alternative agriculture and healthy food movement could not have come to where it was today without these two individuals. And so it's extremely cool to have them here on campus and doing this teach-in today. We'll get a presentation from each of them, and then hopefully plenty of time for questions and dialogue. I'm dying to know what innovation and professionalism and sustainability is looking like to you guys. And maybe we can, to explore some of that as well as the larger topics that Frankie and Wes are going to, share with us about sort of the state of agroecological food systems. So you got the basic intro on Frances, and give her the warmest love that you got. Thank you.
I'm very, very, very happy to be here, and I will begin. Wes, are you there? There you are. You don't have to come up now, but he is here. So I will be brief. The focus of my life, I made a vow to the universe in 2015 that I would devote the rest of my life to I've been swimming in one stream with two currents, and they have been food and hunger and farming, and the other, that's one current. The other is democracy, because actually, very soon after I wrote Diet for a Small Planet, I wrote, hunger is not caused by scarcity of food, hunger is caused by scarcity of democracy. So I've had these two currents, but I made a vow to the universe that I will stay with my democracy current. So I gave the title of my little song with the dance over there, Wes, I gave it the title, Agroecology, Above Ground Benefits. So I will talk very briefly about agroecology as the democratization in many ways of, and the reason that it's such a brilliant strategy and in fact the only one to feed ourselves, is that it embodies, it germinates democracy in its practices. So I'm sure that I don't have to convince any of you on this beautiful day that corporate chemical agriculture, I refuse to call it industrial because that sounds too good. Corporate chemical agriculture is a dead end, literally in the current moment of a threat to our health and impossible to feed the world in the future. As you know, it destroys soil quality, water quality, and most astonishing is how incredibly inefficient and wasteful. In World Hunger 10 Myths, one of the most astonishing things I learned to finish that book was that U.S. agriculture is so inefficient, despite its image as the modern efficient machine, that we actually feed fewer people per acre than do Chinese farmers or Indian farmers. So I think that's one telling indictment of this so-called efficient modern system. So I will focus in on what I call the benefits above the ground and the social core of agroecology. Yes, we can define it as abetting and guiding the interactions among plants, animals, minerals, so as to enhance all of the water and soil capacity, sustaining present and future life. But my big claim, in addition to all of that wonderful reality, is that, as I said, it germinates a democratic culture. And what I mean by that is, I don't know if any of you heard my talk this morning, my Learning Democracy talk. I've come to define what I mean by democracy as not simply a structure of government, certainly not election plus the market is what we tend to think of here, but democracy as a set of social relations that embodies three fundamental conditions. And they are the wide dispersion, inclusion of all in power, that is in voice, having a voice, transparency in public affairs, because we now know that secrecy, we don't do well, we humans, in shrouded, when things are shrouded in secrecy. And finally, and maybe most important of all, a cultural norm of mutual accountability, the opposite of the blame game that is currently in our blaming and shaming culture, dominated by this so-called free market that actually is driven by one rule that high-strength lister wealth that creates such inequities that we end up with blaming and shaming because we're told that it's fair when it's not. Anyway, that's my speech this morning. I won't go back to it. But so I just want to take then the further point that these three conditions that enable my claim, and this is my claim about agroecology, these three conditions are both brought forth through the practice of agroecology, but also that they actually enable the meeting of deep human needs beyond the physical, beyond just eating and having healthy water, etc., beyond our need for shelter, all those physical needs. I claim we have three emotional needs, and they involve human dignity. They are, number one, a need for a voice, to know that we have a say, that we count. Two, our need for meaning beyond just our own survival. And three, our need for connection, community with each other and the earth. And so power, meaning, and connection is the theme song that I carry, that against which I measure any social innovation. Do they enhance one, distributed power, transparency, and mutual accountability, and do they meet our need for power, meaning, and connection? Power understood as agency and voice. So I'm just quickly then, slide 3, that it seems to me that by its very definition, let's just start with power and with a sense of power in our lives, that by not being dependent on distant corporate suppliers, monopoly suppliers, where you see, as in GMOs, where the seed cost has spiraled up and the individual farmer has no recourse, that dependency certainly spells a feeling of powerlessness. And so agroecology then, by definition, it enables farmers to feel that they are making real choices based on what? On their own learning and their own circumstances. And that then enhances, I believe, dignity, self-respect. Likewise, in terms of empowerment, farmers are, of course, active generators of knowledge. They are not just recipients of other people's instructions. And third, that farmers experience the shared creation of knowledge, which itself meets not only the need for power, but for community. So I argue then through that agroecology balances gender relations as well. It's another aspect of meeting these deep needs. On slide 4, that agroecology, by definition, meets our need for larger meaning, because one knows that one is farming in ways that enable a reduction in the overuse of water and the destruction of our soil, and offers healthier lives for not only one's own family but others. And also, farmers increasingly, I'm sure, are aware that they are helping in the climate cure as growing agroecologically. 5, this one. And then in this need for feeling connection, clearly the corporate chemical system makes one feel constantly in competition with one's neighbor, and whereas I think there's a great deal of evidence that agroecology engenders an ethic of cooperation. And of course, many farmers learn about these practices through communal teachings, shared teachings, and they also realize that they're in this together, that their farm's practices affect their neighbors' practices, etc., and back and forth. And so there's a strong element then, and of course in seed sharing and saving, that then strengthens the bonds of connection. So again, agroecology, I argue, meets these deep, deep human needs beyond physical. So I just want to make my case by telling you a couple of, first some facts about the spread of agroecology in the Global South, and then a couple of stories that have changed my life. Just on, this is the next slide. Worldwide agroecology is proving itself. Many of you may know of a study that was done several years ago, 10 million farmers on 32 million acres around the world, and found that in this study in the Global South that crop yields, this was in sub-Saharan Africa, crop yields more than doubled on average. This is not terribly as up to date as it should be, but in the decade before 2011, that globally, organically farmed land, of course a type of agroecology, more than doubled in that decade, and in India it grew eightfold. So in the two southern states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, ecological farming has reduced pesticide use on about 2 million farms, accounting for 15% of the farmland. In Andhra Pradesh, pesticide use dropped by half in 4 years, and I found those figures so encouraging. And I had the privilege and the great, great pleasure of visiting outside of Hyderabad, India, in what was then Andhra Pradesh, now Telangana. I visited communities of women who 25 years ago, they told me, they kept using the word dark, our lives were dark, and they explained what they meant by that in story. They said, we were so poor that we only had one sari to wear. And do you know what that means? It means we couldn't bathe properly. We had to kind of clean one part of our sari and wrap it around us and clean the other part. That's how poor we were. We had to sleep on sticks to keep us out of the water during the rainy season. We were beaten by our husbands. We were humiliated by the landlord. Our life was very, very dark. And as they described to me what happened as they transitioned to agroecology practices in which they work, each week they meet at 9 o'clock at night after their children are in bed, and they plan together their common practices in the fields of converting to this multitude. They grow like 20 crops on 1 acre. That was not unusual. I went through these farms that had in one field oil seeds and greens and millets. And millets, by the way, were their prize. That's what they were really focusing on. And these women were the picture of dignity and hope and confidence. And by the way, as we sat there having tea with their mounds of grain in front of us, it was a young man who served us tea. And they proceeded to build their confidence and their power, and they petitioned for 7 years to get their own radio station so that they could share with their neighboring villages what they were doing. They then started processing their millets together, so they saved time and money. They began marketing them together. And every year for now, probably a dozen years, or more than that, every February they go, and part of their practice of sharing of their knowledge is to go village to village with these carts. I tried to find a cart that I could show you. These carts of they're musical, where they have bells and people are dancing, and they go to village and they get attention, and then they create a seed saving and sharing learning session where they teach their neighbors in other villages how to save and share seeds and about their ecological practices. Then they got more courage, and they stood up to the state government and said, look, why are you feeding our children white rice in their school lunches that has no nutrition? why don't you use our millets, our nutritious millets instead? And they got the local government, the state government, to begin to procure their millets for the school lunches in the state. And that was a huge, huge political victory. So that day, as I left their embrace, I started walking away, and they ran after me, and they said, "Oh, we forgot to tell you the most important thing." And I said, "What?" And they said, "What we got most from our sangams, these groups of women making decisions together. This is the Deccan Development Society, DDS, and you can go to their website. They have a beautiful, it's ddsindia.org. And they said, "Oh, we forgot to tell you the most important thing we got from our groups. Courage." They said it was courage. And of course, I think I kind of got that, but I kind of was very touched that they wanted to make sure that I got it. So when I got home, I did this over-the-top blog that's still on the net. That I said, "I just saw the solution to world hunger." It was my title of my blog. So then jump to Niger is another powerful example. I have not been there to see this, and I want to understand how more that it happened, but I want to tell you about it because virtually nobody knows about it. Agroforestry is considered one of the most important agroecological practices in terms of carbon sequestration and in many advantages of protecting the soil and the integration of crops and trees. It's considered very advantageous. And so Niger, the practice there was not planting new trees, but nurturing the regrowth of trees, because under the colonial government, for some reason, the deal was that the French were in charge, but they thought that if they were criticized by the colonials for mistreating the tree, anyway, they cut all the trees down. And so there were all these stumps that had not been trees for a very long time. But it turns out, if you stop cutting off the, you probably know a lot more about tree regrowth than I do, but imagine this. To regrow trees when you're very, very poor and you need that firewood, and it takes a long time for the tree to grow, and somebody's telling you, "Oh, it's good to have trees growing with your crops, it really enhances it." That's kind of a hard sell. Think about the social organization, the trust they had to develop among themselves to enforce the rules to enable those trees to regrow. And there, can you see this incredible photograph? On the photo it says there, "Small farmers have nurtured the regrowth, reversing the desert's intrusion, tripled crop yields." And now this has gone on, I believe, it's huge. 1/2 of the farmland, I believe, in Niger. It is huge. And so it is one of those examples that had to involve tremendous amount of cooperation, what I like to call, really living democracy, because they're making rules together to enable that kind of regrowth. And my understanding, it secured food security for 2 million people. So it is an amazing accomplishment. And I would then just conclude and hand this over to Wes, who's going to tell you some really exciting news, that agroecology is not a choice because it is the only approach to feeding ourselves that aligns with nature and with human nature and enabling farmers to experience power, meaning, and connection as they contribute to thriving democratic cultures. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Frances. Okay, make yourself comfy. Wes Jackson, my friends, is just one of the greatest leaders that I learned from. During my sentence working at USDA for 5 years, midway through, Deputy Secretary Merrigan brought in Wes and his team from the Land Institute, and in the USDA headquarters building is a beautiful marble building right on the mall in DC. It has this very elegant indoor plaza with a balcony around it. My office was on the second floor there, right off the balcony surrounding this indoor, beautifully lit plaza. And Wes brought the photographer X-ray print of this 30, 40 foot long root system that the Land Institute had, preserved and, demonstrating the depth, literally, and power of the prairie ecosystem below the soil. And it hung there for a good long time, and I got to look at that every day, and it was a great inspiration for what we were trying to do. So I can't believe how cool it is to welcome Wes Jackson here, along with Frankie Lappé at UCSC.
Well, it was great to start with Frankie. She's an old warrior that you folks ought to be very proud that what she has done over her, you've been around about a century? Yeah. Anyway, this half of the talk is the social, political, economic part of it all. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the science, and then we can see how the two can integrate. We got a problem of establishing cultural capacity and keeping cultural capacity, and that is one of the major contributions of the career of Frankie Lappé. Agroecology or ecological agriculture. I'm going to push now, only for purposes of this talk, ecological agriculture, in order to put the term ecology in front of agriculture. And it means the same. I don't want to go to the mat over which term, but I want the term ecology burned into our frontal lobes as important. Agriculturists have had the burden to be prescriptive. The food supply is on the line. Ecologists have had the luxury to be descriptive. And those are two cultures. And when you start bearing down on it, you realize that this is a two-culture problem. The difference between the prescriber and the describer. So I think that is an old problem. Now we have many challenges with agriculture. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report said that agriculture is primarily responsible for the loss of biodiversity. And we all know we need to save the biodiversity. Agriculture is land use is number 2 as a source of greenhouse gases, behind power plants and the head of all transportation. The biggest part of the land use contribution to that is through agriculture, annual grain agriculture primarily. And the United Nations has said, and this has been going on for some time, we're now losing about 30 million acres a year worldwide due to land degradation. So, here's a fact, I guess I'll call it, that it's terribly important to know. That nature's ecosystems, on a global basis, nature's ecosystems generally have greater net primary production than the human-managed systems that follow. So I'm trying to make the argument of the look to nature, and nature as a measure. I know there are problems with the word nature, there are problems with the word sustainable, there are problems with almost every word we get to. Wittgenstein said something to the effect, words always force us to feel informed, but when we turn to face the world, they always fail us. So we're not going to have that sort of hassle here today. I have bodyguards. Now, in 1977, the General Accounting Office study came out that showed that, well, it looked to me like we were losing as much soil due to erosion as we had been losing during the 1930s when the Soil Conservation Service was formed under the energetic and imaginative Hugh Hammond Bennett in the Roosevelt administration. I thought, now how can this be? Given the terraces, the grass waterways, the attention, no organization had been put together with more esprit de corps devoted to the common task of saving our soils. And there are a lot more people on the land then. But here we are. How can it be? And I read somewhere once that it was back in the 30s that, and I've tried to find it since, that at one time, 1/7 of the total federal budget was allocated to the soil conservation. Now it was back during those years in which we had a lot of make-work problems and make-work opportunities, so in a certain sense it's not fair. But nevertheless, it does make a statement that we have tried and that agriculture is very hard to sustain on a large scale. So if you were to make a pie-shaped figure for a slideshow and then divide it up in terms of human activity over the last 10 to 12,000 years of agriculture, what do we do mostly? What would be the biggest piece of pie? Well, I can tell you, it's weeding. Agriculturists historically have been primarily weeders. And if we want to know why we have so many herbicides being put into our world, is because we were not meant to be farmers. If we were meant to be farmers, we'd have had longer arms. Weeding is not fun on a big scale. It's all right in your garden, but we do not like to weed. I grew up on a farm in which we had some 20 to 27 crops, and I grew up on the end of a hoe handle. And I can tell you, it is the kind of thing that the scale is large. It is not something you want to do very much, and when you have a way to get rid of the weeds without the hoe or bending over, and it's all summer long, you go for it. So the General Accounting Office said, you know, it looks to me like, well, my interpretation was that soil erosion was about as bad, that I took my students, some interns, on a trip to the Konza Prairie And there I saw a system in which there was no weeding on the part of the human, no fossil fuel input. This is never plowed native prairie near Manhattan, Kansas. We have some of that at the Land Institute too. We have bison on ours. There is no chemical introduction of chemicals. So here's a system. How's that different than our agricultural fields? Well, they're perennials, and they're grown in mixtures where you take advantage. The system operates with efficiencies that are inherent with the integrated system overall. So that's sort of what set me off, and we set out to build an agriculture based on perennials that would be grown in mixtures, and that if we stopped with perennial monocultures, we'd missed half the point. So after 40 years, I'll give you a report that we now have the first perennial grain ever and the first new grain in the last 4,200 years in our kernza. And there's some beer here on the coast. You can get kernza beer. It's actually called Long Root Ale, and you can get it up at Whole Foods in Washington, Oregon, California, and not Kansas. Actually, if you go to certain places, you can, but you can't get Long Root Ale in Kansas. So, what does this mean? Well, as a consequence of that, there's these recent successes, and there's still a long ways to go. Breeding takes a lot of time. You know, a new variety of wheat typically had its first pollination 15 years before. And that's for something that's been on the human inventory a long time, you know, 10,000 years. So, what this does, however, is provide us, and I don't like to use this term, but I can't think of a better one, and that is, we now have new hardware. If you think of the annual as being the hardware that invites certain software, that involves the field of agronomy. But now, over the last 150 years, there are thousands of papers that have been put on the shelf about the way nature's ecosystems work. Whether it's rainforest or whether it, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with a swamp. A swamp has a lot of net primary production. There may be something wrong with a cesspool, but we've got to get it straight. You know, don't ever say anything bad about a swamp. It's a very good thing. And don't, for God's sakes, drain it. You drain cesspools. I throw that in for no extra charge. We've got a global inventory going on from the tropics to the temperate zone, and it means that we're now able to take ecology off the shelf, all the ecological insights. In other words, those that were being descriptive, and this argues for basic research again, those that were being descriptive for a century and a half have now given us insights on the way nature's ecosystems work. And there is now answers to questions in that body of knowledge, answers to questions we've not yet learned to ask. That's big. And it ought to make us very proud of being a species that was wanting to know originally, back in the 1600s, the beginning of the Royal Society, it was really to understand how nature is. But the technologists got involved, the inventors, they finally let them into the Royal Society, and then it was how nature works. And that's an important distinction between how nature is versus how nature works. And so we, of course, want to know how nature works. But there's a certain kind of, I'll call it a spiritual relationship associated with those that want to know how nature is, and that's what a lot of ecologists were about. So, we can imagine now the end of soil erosion, the end of chemical contamination of the land and water. We can also begin to imagine not only the end of the great reduction in the greenhouse gases, but actually a net sequestering of carbon, because these annual systems that are leaking and are responsible for a lot of greenhouse gases, we can imagine the fixing of the carbon. And I want to show you a photograph now that is somewhat like the one. Let's see, I need a couple of cards here. I thought I had somebody lined up to come and help me, and they've gone. Let's see. Yeah, well, this is good. So, here is the wheat plant that started civilization. This is actual size, Fred. And here is Kernza, intermediate wheatgrass. And you can now get beer out of that. And Patagonia's got stuff coming out of it, food coming out, and so on. So, well, that's it. And so, you know, we can just count for some of you the road to Damascus experience for ecological agriculture or something like that. So, just to, you can put that on the ground. Thank you. I just want to say one last thing. Gary Snyder has a poem. It's at the end of Turtle Island. And the title of it is For the Children. And I won't be able to repeat all of it, but it goes something like this. Somebody can help me if they want to say the whole thing. It's not a very long poem. He's talking about the rising hills of statistics that go up, up, up. Population growth, resource depletion, chemical contamination of the land and water. The rising hills of statistics go up, 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 even as we all go down. But if we make it, he says, we'll meet on the other side, where they say, and this will be a beautiful landscape, sustainable paradise. The Land Institute is contributing to those rising hills of statistics. You should see our tractors, our greenhouses, our combines, our fossil fuel powered equipment, the regulation of the temperature in the greenhouses. All of that. Big question. On that other side, will our herbaceous, as opposed to woody, perennial, as opposed to annual, grain-producing agriculture, the 70% of our calories, will they require to be sustained what brought them into existence? That's a big question. And I think the answer is no. Even a creature of the upper Paleolithic, of the Neolithic, could take over those plants and continue them. It wasn't until the last 15 to 20 years that we have been able to develop perennial grains. And it's because a couple of our guys have figured out why our ancestors never developed perennial grains and why we can now. It has largely to do, I won't get into the genetic details, don't worry, it's not gene splicing or any of that, but it's actually computational power and more of an insight on the genome. So, will they need what is contributing to their coming into existence? And I say the answer is no, because of the creatureliness that is there that we can still manage. The industrial world, the materials world cannot say that, whether it's wind machines, solar collectors, or whatever. So I think we have opportunity for a great run, as Gary Snyder said, if we make it. And it will be a wonderful thing to keep alive what we have learned as the consequence of, the Bible says, there will be a new heaven and a new earth. The astrophysicists, the physicists have given us the scientifically verifiable, the new heaven. And now we have the opportunity for the new earth. And that's going to be harder. That's going to be harder than what they did. But we are the only species that has become matter and energy's way of having gained self-recognition. That's big. If we make it, it'll be a great run and the only species in this part of our sidereal universe. And so that's my prayer.
I just want to let that sink in for a couple seconds. All right. Ground yourselves back here in the sidereal universe. We're going to open it up for questions. I've certainly got a few, but I want to see how many people here are ready with one. Anybody? I know that's a lot. It's a lot to sink in. Okay, well, let me get a couple things started. As some of you may know, this very moment, the U.S. Congress, House of Representatives, is debating on its floor the 2018 Farm Bill. Been having a hard time keeping myself from, checking my Twitter feed, even though most of the drama is, still months away. But Wes, a few years ago, you and Wendell Berry wrote about a 50-year Farm Bill. And that's where we get into this intersection between science and democracy and how we can exert change to achieve these agroecological, fundamentally democratic systems there on the other side of the pill of statistics. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what you were trying to achieve with that discourse about a 50-year farm bill, being able to look that far ahead at how we as a society and as a country could articulate a vision grounded in the mundanity of public policy.
Well, I can tell you how it came that we did a 50-year farm bill. I lost all interest in the 5-year farm bills, and Bob Kerrey, who had been the governor of Nebraska, and then a U.S. senator, and then out, he was wanting me to work on a 5-year farm bill. I said, I'm not interested. I want a 50-year farm bill. He said, well, we'll do both. Well, I held up my end of the bargain. He didn't. But here's the thing. Joan and I, my wife, we went to Washington. We went in and out of the various places. The one time that I think we met, we didn't see the Secretary of Agriculture. We saw the deputy for a little bit. And then we kept getting moved downward till, we're dealing with somebody 27 to 28 years old. And they're, holding their hands. And then you sit in the hallway. And where you've been in the senator's office, and he's not available, and you sit there long enough waiting to see, is there someplace else we can go, and you see, 3 suits walk out. Well, you can about guess who they are. This comes down to power. And it comes down to us developing the constituency. And so the 50-year Farm Bill is something that we developed to increase the imagination about that which is possible. It was laying it out over a 50-year period, the transition from annuals to perennials, so that we just invert. We're not getting rid of all annuals, but we invert, and that takes up that, and then you can even estimate what the soil loss will be and what the reduction in chemicals would be, and so on. So this is a political matter. And unfortunately, the scientific world doesn't seem all that interested in a paradigm shift when we have such little to show right now. And this means that we're not thinking enough long term enough. Now, am I answering your question?
Thank you. So Frankie, that brings us back to the very beginning of your talk here about power in different forms, maybe as the fundamental goal or attribute of both democracy and our food system. So how do you look at the sort of current food movement, its power, through that lens of what's going on in the public sphere and the sort of apparatus that we have in our country that governs the food system?
Thank you so much. Well, I am obsessed, you could say, at this moment with the arising democracy movement. And I love being old because when I say that it's the first time in my life, it means something. And this is my talk this morning, and I'll just tell you that it was transformational 2 years ago when I part of Democracy Spring, the largest, one of the largest at least, civil disobedience on the Capitol steps for democracy reforms. That means system reforms, that means money out of politics and voting rights. And so I'm looking now, and the amazing thing about it is that this rising democracy movement, I would love to see more of food movement participation in it, because it's in that march from Philadelphia to Washington, and then the teach-ins and the actions on the steps, there were probably 100 to 130 organizations represented, from Greenpeace to Sierra Club to Communications Workers of America to NAACP, and on and on. And I don't remember there must have been food movement people there, but I would love to see this realization that so stirs me, that people are getting it. They're not giving up their issue, but they're saying, to succeed on my issue, I must be part of the system reform, the democracy system reform. And just to underscore that, I just saw the statistic the other day that there are more agribusiness lobbyists in Washington today than there are oil and gas industry lobbyists. It's pretty frightening. And when you think even a decently benign president, Barack Obama put Monsanto executives in important positions in USDA. So clearly, we have a deeply compromised, if you can call it even a democracy in terms of our political democracy, and compromised by such concentrated wealth that 0.5% of us contributed 2/3 of all the campaign money in the 2016 election, which, by the way, compared to other global elections between 2012 to 2017, we ranked 130th in, there were 265, I believe, elections over that period around the world, and we ranked 130th, so we didn't even rank up there with the industrial West. So I'm just underscoring that the absolute necessity for, and it's not, I say this, I want to underscore how thrilling it is. I'm not asking any of you to take on another burden. It is really thrilling to see people coming together, and my little institute, Small Plans Institute, initiated a field guide to the democracy movement, which our dream is that it's a hub for everybody interested, whatever your issue is. And the URL is Field Guide to Democracy. And it's not that exciting yet, but you can go there and you can see a map of the states and what initiatives are happening now, and all these different organizations from all these issues that are part of the democracy movement. So I just want to underscore with some of this recent bad news about the increase in lobbying and the power of agribusiness over decisions that are so harmful. And at the same time, I want to underscore the actual breakthrough now that there is, largely invisible still to most people, an umbrella democracy movement. I'll stop with this one, I think, stirring number that one of the leaders that we teamed up with to create this new hub, online hub, Field Guide to Democracy. It represents 63 organizations, again, from labor to environment to racial justice, representing 40 million Americans. These organizations who are saying yes to my concern, my particular issue, but we've got to go to democracy together. So I just wanted to put that out for you all.
Okay, I'm still looking for hands. Okay, in the red shirt, t-shirt there, and then right in front of him. So give us your name and belt it out, and I'll repeat the question for the tape.
Yes, my name is John. I was curious, what are your views on monocropping in vertical farms? Is that a detriment to the long-term viability of this planet, or do you think that it'll be like a shift that'll happen, and then we'll see more farms turn back into their natural habitat?
Okay, so the question is about vertical farms and other forms maybe of intensified urban agriculture, hydroponics, recirculating systems. You see this as part of the solution? What are aspects of it that you think have promise, and what are the drawbacks?
Well, I think vertical farms are nuts. Think about sunlight falling on square footage. See, we think we're going to get something from that. It'd be like a rancher saying, if I got a hilly ranch, I'm going to have more biomass because you've got this undulation, and that isn't the way it works. The second thing is that when you get into the small scale, and you got pumps and motors and the movement of things, Bob Rodale years ago, they found the energy cost on that, and they abandoned the work. Let's think about soil and the erosion of the soil, rather than being distracted by some of the technology that is somewhat in the gee whiz category. So I saw you raise your hand.
I wanted to farming uses aeroponics and UV lighting to grow plants outside of soil inside old factories that have been like refurbished. So like there's a company in New York that's currently doing that and selling in organic markets and to chefs.
Yeah. Just, well, I'm not interested. Here's one thing I am interested in. I'm interested in beginning to turn up the heat on my fellow scientists about some other possibilities for agriculture. Turn up the heat a bit. They will respond. They'll say we don't have the money, but they also are writing proposals, and they also have, in some respects, more clout than the run-of-the-mill citizen. So we tend to think of going to the politicians. But the scientists are, I think, would be ready, but they've got to be encouraged on helping with the political realm.
Okay, next question there.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Francis, you said something about we are 130th, something about money and politics, right? I didn't understand the statement, so I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, questions clarifying there where we are in the ranking of democracies.
Well, the Electoral Integrity Project in Harvard, also partnering with University Sydney, it's a really interesting website, Electoral Integrity Project. And they did a look at the 5 years of elections from 2012 to 2017 around the world. And there were 265 overall. And we ranked in electoral integrity, these are 11 elements they look at. They have 3,000 plus investigators around the world who are observing elections and rank them by 11 different elements. And we came out at 130th in that. So we were not even up there close to Western industrial societies that we compare ourselves to. And on gerrymandering, get this, and California has to be proud of this one, but the negative part, not proud of what I'm about to say, but I'll get back to that. In gerrymandering, we are about 1/3 from the bottom in the entire world's their assessment of the extreme gerrymandering. Madagascar is the worst, and we're almost down there with Madagascar. But California, one of the things that we do in Dairy Democracy, Adam Eichen and I, is celebrate your process that you went through to create your districting commission and do it in such an astounding way with such care to make it geographic and culturally and geographically diverse and representative. I met a woman who has, I believe, 4 children at home below the age of 6, and she said, I represent at-home moms, and she's on the commission. But they got this. And then the last stage, the amazing thing, when they were picking like who was going to be on this commission, they showed this picture of like if you've been at a bingo game where you have that tumbler and you pull out a number and it's random. Well, they wanted to make it so, this is after like 9 other stages they go through to make it nonpartisan and non-slanted toward one party, right? But in the end, it's like a bingo pulling the ball out of the bingo tumbler. So, you are doing better, but back to your simple question, I mean, your original question, we ranked 130 of 265 elections over that period, which is, and in some ways, particularly in gerrymandering, we are really near the bottom. So we have a long way to go now to even, we say, oh, we're not quite as good as Europe, but we're not even close.
Okay, I'll go from the front here, and then right behind, and then in the hat there. Go ahead.
All right, yeah, I'm Jono, and I have a couple questions about the current dud. Where else is it being grown besides the Landing Institute, and are there other products coming out now?
more questions about Kernza and the future.
Yeah. Well, we have Kernza growing in Sweden and in, well, we have perennials in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Now, when we say that we have two people in Argentina that are working with the David Van Tassel's sunflower family member, um, which is an oilseed crop. There are a lot of people, farmers, growing it up in Minnesota and northern Iowa. Um, there's some interest, considerable interest now in General Mills. Um, the thing that we've got to be really pushing on all the time, because it's so easy to think of perennial monocultures. But if we stop with the perennial monoculture, we've missed half the point. It's the ecosystem concept. That's the conceptual tool. I know it's not the most poetic way to put it, but we're really talking about slabs of space-time that are integrated, and that's the whole ecosystem. So, well, let's see. Asia, Africa, Latin America, uh, but the scale is still small because it's a quasi, well, there are a few farmers doing it without any assistance from agronomists, but we like to have agronomists working with these early farmers now. We've got, well, what all do they make? You can make waffles and pancakes and cookies and so on. And if you want to make bread out of it, you better have about, half of it as being wheat so that you get the bread to rise because it's low in gluten. And, we'll get, now for gluten, there seems to be a prejudice against gluten anymore. Uh, so we're not exactly gluten-free, but we're down there pretty close. Uh, but there's reason to believe that we will get the gluten up in it and so on. Bakers are getting quite interested in it. And so I don't know, that's kind of a vague, all over the place sort of answer, which scientists frequently do.
I think that's right to the point. Go ahead, next question.
So, kind of following on that, part of the appeal of, appeal is not the right word, but part of what drives modern commercial agriculture is it's all about less labor power, and and we're making up for that with fossil fuels and everything else. So how do things like agroforestry, things like these perennials, um, what are the trade-offs in terms of labor intensity to grow in a more ecologically sane way, and to actually mimic humans and ecosystems at some more accurate ways? What do we expect to see kind of as the trade-offs and the requirements in terms of human labor?
Yeah, that's good. The trade-offs of the labor equation in ecological agriculture systems.
Well, there, I won't go into the long story on this, but I think it's an important story because that I'm about to tell, because it shows the social and political um, ramifications that can have to do with agriculture. Several years ago, um, Eric Sachs from the University of Illinois at Urbana stopped by on his way back from the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines. He had been heading up a study to get genes from perennial rice into rice, genes for resistance to, I don't know, some pathogens or insects. And then that project was over. And so we said, what about the perennial rights? Oh yeah, well it's there. And then, but he had an assistant by the name of Bing Wei, had his PhD in genetics or breeding, and he was from China. So, you know, we saw to it that that germplasm got sent to China, and Bing Wei, we were particularly interested in the upland rice, where there's a lot of erosion. But they have also got now perennial rice, thousands of acres of it. The word is that this reduces the labor for the women, and women with less labor on the planting of the rice, they don't have to plant it every year, are more empowered, and empowered women want fewer children. So there is a social agricultural phenomenon. And look, agriculture, we're sure to see a huge change, I think, with perennial grain polycultures, because we're going, there will be a change in the cultural capacity of humans, and also I think it will serve as an analog for the social political realities. After all, a prairie is a real economy. If we have that as the standard, and we're trying to mimic that with our grains, we're going to be looking to, we're going to develop an increase in our imagination about social, political, economic realities. Right now, we're stuck with the hardware of the annual. And out of that has come maybe the idea of domination and suppression. You suppress weeds. You can think of all kinds of pejorative language that is a derivative of the hardware of the annual grain, which is what set us on the course in the first place at the eastern end of the Mediterranean 10 to 12,000 years ago. So one of the things that I am looking forward to and want to study is things like pruning rules from the universe, from the early stage in the universe until coming of our planet and the origin of life. And before that, the journey from minerals to cells. There have been pruning rules along the way. The whole thing is process and emergence. And ecosystems can teach us about process and emergence, and then we will begin to come to terms with such problems as the counterintuitive behavior of social systems. You see, this got a big bunch of stuff coming at us that is now the consequence of us finally getting in harmony. And that is a great adventure ahead of us.
Francis?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with studies of labor demands in agroforestry, but just intuitively, or just, I'd love your comment, but trees are perennials, right? And that in parts of Africa, I know that I've looked at this, um, some are fruit-bearing, nut-bearing, so you get that nutrition from the trees as well as the crops. And I've also seen evidence of, it makes sense with the trees working with the crops of rising, the returning of water tables to earlier, and which itself potentially reduces labor demands, because of course so much of particularly women's time is searching for water, and just the demands of how do you supply water in dry areas, so that anything that would reduce the loss and potentially in some cases return water tables is a very positive thing, I would think, for labor. Um, but just the fact that you're getting some nutrition from the trees as well seemed to me part of a good labor equation.
In our 50-year Farm Bill, we doubled the acreage of the trees over the 50 years. And we also increased the vegetable crops, about doubled them. So we're not talking about getting rid of, we're talking about the increase of. It's just that you make that, look, we got 97 million acres of corn. And like, I think it's around 70 million acres of soybeans. And and then, of course, and rice is the #1 crop, wheat is the #2, and corn is #3, and then #4 is potato, which is not a grain, and then we're back into we're primarily grass seed eaters, and secondarily legume seed, huh? Yeah, as well. I mean, human beings. What do you say?
I'm saying we're eating all that corn too.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, corn. Look, who was it? They thought that those that gave rise to corn thought it was a gift of the gods, and boy, it's been the primary killer of our continent.
I'm not going to add anything to that. One more question there, sir?
I think my question's been answered already. I was concerned about the destruction of the perennial forest involved with, irrigational, switching crops out from the standard traditional perennials to perhaps coffee, beans, production in the Amazon rainforest area, something like that.
Okay, I didn't quite get a question.
Long-term implications of losing our moisture-bearing environment based on the corporate profit.
Desertification, okay. Yeah, I don't know if you heard Maud Barlow's talk this morning. That was, very germane to that question. Any other questions here? Okay, in the red.
Okay, not to belabor the labor question, but
Belt it out, please.
but if all the if the perennial crops are mixed in with weeds and various and lots of other crops, then it sounds like it really would be very labor intensive to actually find what you're looking for. And I realize that in some countries the women may do this by hand, maybe harvest the rice by hand, but in our country where we have very few people working on the farms and it's all done by machinery, wouldn't it require a huge number of people to harvest the crops?
Yeah, so the question is, in more diversified, complex polycultures, does that not increase the labor intensity, and how do we deal with that?
In harvesting.
Especially in harvest. But that wouldn't be the only area, I can tell you.
Well, we dealt with that. I don't know, Sister Abram, whether you heard me talk about the experiment we ran for 2 years where we planted 4 species together. Maybe you didn't. We planted corn, sorghum, sunflowers, and soybeans with an air drill. We did it 2 years in a row. We also planted each one of them as monocultures. And we took corn as a warm season grass, sorghum as a warm season grass, the soybean as a legume, and the sunflower family. They're 4 functional groups of a prairie, and the other one is cool season grass. We didn't have that. Planted them with an air drill, did no weeding, and then when it came time to harvest, opened up the concave on the combine, cut the air so it wouldn't blow the sunflower seeds out the back, and we harvested that instant granola. And then we separated the seeds with a seed cleaner. And we got pretty good separation. And it wasn't perfect, but at the grain elevator, there's a centrifugal drum that'll separate the seeds according to density. Those are those are really not problems as long as you're dealing with the perennial polyculture of grains. What it does is challenge us to plant seeds or plant crops in which the shatter resistance is strong. For instance, in corn, I mean, we still got, I saw a field the other day in Kansas where they hadn't picked the corn. Usually the corn is gone by November. So there's very strong shatter resistance on corn. That's one of the things that breeders do, is select for shatter resistance. So if your maturity is at different times, but not too far apart, then you can harvest it all at once. And this is what we did with the 4 species polyculture. Those were annuals. And I did it because we did that experiment 2 years in a row because people were asking your question. You know, how are you going to plant this? How are you going to harvest it? And so on. And so those are, I mean, I imagine in the future that we will, at some time in the future, we will be harvesting with, you know, draft animals. And we will be managing our perennial polycultures with selective grazers, those are animals, and sometimes with mowing machines, and mowing machines are non-selective grazers. We will be grazing and we'll be collecting. I mean, our imagination on this can just go all over the place. I mean, what we need is almost a utopian novel written as to what this could be. But keep in mind that pie of humanity and why it is that fossil fuel is so desirable. We don't like to weed big acreage, except small acres. Yeah.
You want to add anything on that? We got, what, about 5 more minutes before class is dismissed? In back there, and then Stacy.
So within agroecology, would you say that it's more used and applied in developing countries or in developed countries?
Yeah, what's the distinction between agroecology in developing countries versus fully developed postmodern agricultural? Were you asking to quantify it?
I was just curious if it was more applied and used in developing countries.
Yeah, current usage or?
Well, current usage is the United States, you know, our allies here. I mean, here's what we do. We fund a lot of postdocs and graduate students. I think that, I don't know, 17 or 19 of them now that are working in different universities to develop these various crops. And, you know, these are mostly assistant professors, associate professors that are willing to do this. We came in under the bottom. We didn't come in over the top in those universities. So we're imagining them, they'll grow up and become department heads and deans and so on, and then that'll grow even more. We're also in places like, what? Oh, oh yeah, well, my senile rapture, I'll quit.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how to answer your question, but I know that in Europe, I believe it's in terms of percentage. This is not acreage, but in terms of percentage, I believe Austria is the champion in terms of the most organic acreage, and you know, as a percent, as I'm saying. But these figures I was giving you about the global south are quite dramatic when you think of now in this one state, 2 million acres is moving in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, moving in that direction. The state of Kerala in India, a small state, of course, but it has set the goal of 100% organic. That was about 5 years ago, so they're well on their way now. The northern state where Mononishiba Works is also calling itself an organic state and making that a very, very explicit goal. So this is not, I don't see that this kind of commitment happening in the global north, but it'd be very interesting to know the answer to that question more precisely.
There's your senior thesis.
Stacy? Dr. Philpott?
My question, I am already convinced that agroecology is the way to go in the future. But my question is, what's the single most important thing that we can do to ensure that the farmers like those that you described in Niger or in the women in India or what's going on in the land dispute? Like, what's the most important thing that we can do to ensure that that is the way of the future?
What's the most important thing we can do to ensure ecological agriculture and agroecology are the future?
Well, we're going to need a lot of breeders. Domesticating wild species, I mean, the inventory could go up, huge inventory. And we want a lot of different kinds because we want the polyculture, 3 and 4 species in a mix. There's an awful lot of ecology to be done. That's why I said ecological agriculture instead of agroecology. And by the way, a lot of agroecology is practices that we've had since the time of the Greeks that has to do, and so in our time we know that certain aspects are ecological, and so we dignify it with the term agroecology. Well, of course, because we went to the industrial, and so now we have a term to help us be clear. So we're going to need a lot of politics, a lot of breeders, and a willfulness. A willfulness. We did a paper that only parts of it published called the next synthesis. And the next synthesis lays out what the cost would be over a 30-year period, I think it was. And let's see, it was equal to, for that whole period, it was equal to one of the major subsidies, I can't remember what it was, one of the major subsidies in agriculture now, to pay for that. I mean, it's not that much.
My answer is not going to surprise anybody, but I really believe that one, if not one of the most important things we must do is to have be part of reforming our system of democracy so that it's not answering to corporations instead of to us. And this is when I was writing World Hunger 10 Myths, I was shocked at the degree to which our government is used by Monsanto and other GMO producers to promote and infuse these seeds into the global south. And one story I'll never forget from my colleague at Small Planet, who's our food land rights fellow there. He said that when he was in Malawi, they have a vitamin A rich corn that is favored there, that is native there. And guess what? Monsanto's trying to come in with its engineered versions, but the scene that he showed me a photo with the president standing near a farmer in a market, and she has this beautiful vitamin A rich native corn, and the president of the country says to her, "Oh, is that from Monsanto?" So you get the idea that this is something that we can take responsibility for. We are partially accountable for the fact that our government is being used to promote that. And Monsanto is even helping to write the seed laws in a number of these West African countries where he has visited, East Africa, where he has visited. So anyway, I just wanted to underscore that.
Okay, I think that's a great place to say thank you, thank you, thank you. We are so honored to have the righteous livelihooders here. Thank you so much.
and for Wes, I think too, that we haven't done an event together in decades, and it's just so wonderful to be invited together to talk to you. Thank you.
Yes.